Welcome everyone. In today's episode of Hidden History, I will be discussing Hyperborea and Great Tartaria. The landmass of Hyperborea existed in Siberia and elsewhere in northern Russia. Indeed, the civilization which the Hyperboreans actually developed went on to manage other landmasses and therefore controlled Iceland, Greenland and the Arctic continent. Even though much of northern Russia and Great Tartaria is now covered in glacial sheeting and snowy landscapes, around 25,800 BC, Hyperborea was a fabulously luscious and fertile landmass. The communities of Hyperborean Aryans were blessed with longevity, peaceful settlements, telluric generators of lighting and heating, and the concept of sickness and diseases was never evident. From what has been written about Hyperborea, the landmass was described as having southward perimeters that bordered by the Riparian Mountains, which were also known as the Riparian Mountains. The vast Riparian Mountains were apparently located in northern Russia and therefore northern Eurasia. The main waterway of Hyperborea was the Eridanos River that flowed into the Baltic Sea. The banks of the Eridanos River were lined with amber sweeping poplar trees, and its aquatic environment was home to massive flocks of the great white swans. Because the landmass of Hyperborea produced biannual fruit, vegetables and grain crops, most of the countryside was highly fertile and covered with luscious forests. Before its destruction, the landmass of Hyperborea existed to 25,800 BC as a civilization which had produced advanced occult technology. Because of the relatively warm climate and vibrant telluric currents of the atmosphere over Hyperborea, the lifespans of the Hyperborean Aryans were very long, and therefore such individuals developed profound scientific knowledge, which included the manufacturing of devices and mechanisms which could be used for the purpose of levitation and electric air flight. Within Greek mythology, it is clearly written that the southward perimeter of Hyperborea was definitely concealed by the bitterly cold and entirely impassable Riparian Mountains, and the home to the Greek deity called Boreas Olympos, whose chilly breath brought winter to the landmasses of the southern lands. Apparently, the peaks of the Riparian Mountains were inhabited by the radiantly intense-looking griffins that were also known as the Gryphons, or the curved beings. Such life forms closely guarded the Chrysos Siaphos, or the golden treasure of the luminous caverns, against the fierce Hyperboreae Cyclopsis, or the beyond the north wind round-eyed beings. And they were known as the single-eyed beings, the Aramposmos, who collectively resided in northern Siberia next to the Riparian Mountains, which many believe were actually the northern Ural Mountains and the polar Ural Mountains of northern Russia. Again, we learn from Greek mythology that beneath the uplands of the Riparian Mountains was situated the landmass of snowy covered territory, where boundless wintry conditions were the normality. With tremendous efficiency, the Pterophoroi, or winged people who resided in Boreae Scythiae, North Shepherd country, closely worked alongside the Scuffes, shepherd people. Today such individuals are known as the Scythian Aryans. The vast landmass of Hyperborea was known to be some kind of astral divine rulership that was ruled by three solar priests of the Greek deity, Apollon Olympos. Each of the Hyperborean kings were enormous in stature and were known as Zephos Olympos and Kalos Olympos. And they were the Boreadae, or Wind Brothers, that were sons of the Boreas, or North Wind. The residents of Hyperborea also celebrated their astral deities in festive gatherings of music, song and dance, whose hymns were always joined by the songs of the circling Hyperboreae Cycnae beyond the north wind swans, or the Hyperborean swans. From what is mentioned in Greek mythology, it is known that the next major divine temple connected with the Hyperborean Aryans was the Pythe, or the Mantio of Apollo, Olympos, at Delphoi in the Phocis region of central Greece. The anciently founded divine temple, which was comprised of druid shrines and druid groves, was said to have been constructed by the Hyperborean Aryans and the Beyond the North Wind giants, or the Hyperborean giants, out of the waxen fluid and sparkling gold and silver feathers. When the chieftain of the Gaulish Celts, who was called Brennus Senon, tried to seize the divine temple during August 279 BC, astral spirits from the Phocis region of central Greece were said to have appeared on the battlefield where they routed the chieftain army. Certain stories from Greek folklore mention that when the Greek partial deity called Heracles Olympos, also known as Hercules, worked alongside the dactoi finger entities, they established a ceremony in honor of Zeus Olympos, and he also made a pilgrimage to Hyperborea in northern Russia to obtain wild olives for the deity shrine. The most famous grove prophet of the Hyperborean Aryans was called Arabus Sophisu, who was given a magical arrow by the Greek deity called Apollon Olympos, with which he flew around planet Earth performing miracles. Some mention this magic arrow was the one which Apollon Olympos had used to slay the Spaialokailopos, or the cavern round-eyed beings, which had been concealed beneath the Hyperborean mountains. That was a geological formation which brightly sparkled and was therefore also called the Criso Bueno, or Golden Mountain. Many academics from classical Greece and Roman Italy mentioned the landmass of Hyperborea. These quotes are a small number of the numerous scholar comments that have been made about Hyperborea over the span of many generations. The Greek lyric poet called Pindaros de Phanto wrote, "Of the fairest glories that mortals may attain, to him is given to sail to the furthest bound, yet neither ship nor marching feet may find the wondrous ways to the gatherings of the Hyperborean people." The Greek poet called Aeschylus Euphorios wrote, "Your wish is better than gold. It surpasses great good fortune, even that of the Hyperboreans." Before 25,800 BC, the landscapes of Hyperborea brightly shimmered with the frozen light cities, where the spiraling flocks of the Cresses Corcoveges, or the golden owls, nested in the sparkling trees and shrubs from the surrounding urban settlements. From certain stories from Russian folklore and Turkic folklore, it is known that over many generations, the Hyperborean Aryans who managed to escape from the geographic reaches of northern Russia, where Hyperborea once existed, became historically known as the Chedeskis, Narods, or foreign people that went into the Polaya Zemla, or hollow earth, where they became the definable underground people who established themselves beneath northern Asia. Certain stories from Russian folklore and Turkic folklore mention the unusual white-eyed foreign people that were most definitely Aryans who had lightly coloured irises. These individuals were the same foreign people that had been encountered on many occasions in the northern Ural Mountains, the polar Ural Mountains and the Altai Mountains, among the local residents, and the white-eyed foreign people who had decided to collectively travel into the hollow earth, and once they got there, each of them helped to construct some of the crystal cities. The famous naturalist and ethnographer from Western Russia called Alexander Gustav von Schrenck had a conversation with certain Nenets or Samoyed on the 15th of April 1863, in the pastoral Tazovsky district of the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug in northern Russia, about the shimmering lanterns they had continually seen during the nighttime in what the Nenets or Samoyed referred to as the Light Mountains in the polar Ural Mountains. Further to this, some of the Nenets or Samoyed told Alexander Gustav von Schrenck that within the northern Ural Mountains and the polar Ural Mountains are rock faces where numerous small round windows have been carved by the Chechetsky Narod, the foreign people, that were seemingly the Hyperborean Aryans who had retreated into these remote locations. The communities of Hyperboreans would sometimes meet with the Nenets or Samoyed and ask for sheets of iron, which they used in their manufacturing processes. In return for the metals trade, the Hyperboreans would give the Nenets or the Samoyed coats, scarves, gloves made of layered fur. During the 25th of June 1928, the historian and archaeologist from Soviet Russia called Artemy Artiskovsky was given a story by the Kazavego Vaikla and his son, known as the Serakon Vaikla, about the Grand people that apparently resided in the northern Ural Mountains, where, according to the story, they covertly travel beneath northern Russia by using the luminous caverns. There are similar legends about Hyperborea among the Komi people, who also define themselves as the Zyrans and the Permiaks across the expanse of northern Russia. The settlements of Nenets or Samoyed have preserved many legends about the light people of the shining caverns that course into the hollow earth. From what the Nenets or Samoyed mentioned, it would appear the Hyperboreans seem to upwardly travel into the Sikuri ethereal place, which is some kind of passageway that leads into the hollow earth, which courses beneath the Yamalsky district and the Tazovsky district in the polar Ural Mountains. Even stories from Irish, English and European folklore mention the underground people that reside in luminous caverns on the remote landmass known as Sikuri, or ethereal place. Apparently that location was some kind of entrance into the hollow earth, which exists beneath the Yamalsky district and Tazovsky district of the polar Ural Mountains. From the perspective of the Nenets or the Samoyed, just outside the town called Selatkard in northern Russia, there had once been an invisible portal that led into the hollow earth. Even though Western science disputes this etymology, the root word for the Phoenician is actually the word for Phoeniki, which is from the Greek language. According to certain stories from Greek folklore, these kinds of Aryans were the red people. There are two general theories as to why the Greeks also called them the Erythoi and Anthropoi, or reddish people. Apparently, the classical Greeks observed how the Phoenician Aryans seemingly had ruddy complexions, and of course this was because they were the Irish Fenians from the Boyne Valley of County Meath in Eastern Ireland. The communities of Phoenician Aryans had colonised Ireland in an archaic prehistory, when the explorers had searched for the landmass that was known in the Greek language as Thule. The Phoenician Aryans had travelled from the Boyne Valley in County Meath, Eastern Ireland. The word Phu, or North Place, is actually derived from the Irish Gaelic language and is very archaic word indeed. Hence, the word fuel comes from Phu, or North Place. According to Irish folklore, the landmass of Phu beyond north was connected to Greenland, Iceland and the northern Russia. Many have ignored the truth about the origins of the Scottish Celts, but the renowned journalist Alistair Murray Moffat has not, and mentions that when teams of geneticists supervised by Professor Brian Sykes, took DNA samples from the United Kingdom of Great Britain, they discovered ancestries that they were linked with the Caucasus region, which had once been part of Greater Scythia and the Mediterranean Europe. If those prototypical Scotti had travelled from the Great Shepherd country or towards Western Europe, the Scythian Aryans would most likely have journeyed over many generations and centuries by using the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Straits of Gibraltar. This information was presented in the article called The Highland Clans, which Alistair Murray Moffat wrote for the newspaper The Scotsman. Alistair Murray Moffat has continually mentioned that he believes that because of the bloodlines, lineages and landmass habitations of the Scottish Highland clans that they originated from Great Scythia. The Declaration of the Aberoth, that is called the Scottish Declaration of Independence, was drafted and written on the 6th of April 1320. Within the narrative of the Declaration of the Aberoth, it clearly states that the ancestors of the Scottish people and wherefore the Scottish people came from Greater Scythia, and was a territorial expanse which reached across the Pontic-Caspian steppe. This is mentioned in the article called 1200 Years After the People of Israel Crossed the Red Sea, which is on page 159 to page 161 of the book called The Story of the Celto-Saxon Israel by William Henry Bennett. The territories of Scythia were a huge expanse of Central Eurasia that existed in classical antiquity, that were occupied by the Eastern Iranians called the Scythian Aryans. The landmasses of Scythia extended across Central Asia and into parts of Eastern Europe that are eastward of the Vistula River, with the perimeters of the location vaguely defined as the classical Greeks, who gave the name Scythia or Great Scythia to all the landmasses eastward from mainland Europe. And this meant the expanse from eastern Romania, southern Ukraine and northern Georgia, which is next to the Euxine Sea or Black Sea, became the largest settlement for many of the Scythian Aryans. During the Iron Age, these landmasses became highly productive, fertile expanses where the Scythian cultures progressively flourished. According to classical Greeks, the settlements of the Scythian Aryans inhabited Great Scythia from at least 1348 BC to 267 AD. During 793 BC to 725 BC, the communities of Scythian Aryans controlled large geographic expanses of territory throughout Eurasia, from the Euxine Sea to most of Siberia and northern Asia, and onward to the borders of mainland China. However, the locations and extent of the Scythian Empire varied over time. Every territory that had become part of the Great Scythia was also collectively defined as Scythia. Much of the famed Scythian Empire was centered in what is today known as Belarus, Ukraine and Romania. By around 348 AD, the Eastern Iranians known as the Sarmatian Aryans and the last remnants of the Scythian Aryans had become dominated by the Iranian Alans of the North Caucasus region and were overwhelmed by the Germanic Goths. By the early medieval period, the communities of the Scythian Aryans and the Eastern Iranians, who became the Sarmatian Aryans, had been largely assimilated and absorbed by the Slavic people. Even so, the name of the Scythian Aryans did survive in the geographic reaches of Scythia. Many authors from the Byzantine period continue to use the term Scythian, which applied it to many ethnicities that were genetically and racially unrelated to the Scythian Aryans, such as the Siberian tribes and the Huns, the Goths, the Turks, the Avars and the Khazars. The massive Siberian taiga forest went through a number of wildfires over the years that cleared out the tree-lined canopies over vast areas. One of the largest of these wildfire stages occurred in 342 BC. Hence the environmental transition which contributed to the demise of the Scythian Empire and establishment of Great Tartaria occurred from 342 BC and onwards. The territories of northern Russia were one of the main areas inhabited by the Scythian Aryans, who were sometimes called the Classical Scythians and the Pontic Scythians. Every aspect which defined their civilization lasted from 786 BC until 342 BC. After this date, many ecological disasters occurred in the Siberian taiga forests of Eurasia and then Greater Scythia, which resulted in the Scythian Aryans moving from locations where massive destruction had occurred. Across expanses of the West Siberian taiga, which extends over much of the West Siberian plain in northern Russia, the landmass of Great Tartaria would eventually rise to prominence because of the massive quantities of charcoal, smoke, cracked topography which had arisen from the wildfires in West Siberian taiga. It meant that everything looked dusty, smoky and very murky. The exclusive Uralic language that is specifically called the Magyar language formed the basis of the Tartarian language of northern Russia. However, after some generations had transpired, most communities of Tartarian Aryans had begun to use different alphabet throughout much of the Tartarian Empire, because the Turkic people, such as the Tartars and the Altays and the Altaians and the Yukuts, the Shuvas, the Tuvans and the Kakas, had culturally influenced them. Thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video on Hyperborea and Great Tartaria. There are many more videos to come in this series, so please subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next week.